Hey guys, it's Khalil. Back again with Luka to talk about Star Wars politics again. Last time, you probably noticed it was a little unstructured, but generally, you might have noticed we were talking about corruption within the Republic, the Galactic Republic, the government force that was in place in the Star Wars galaxy before the Empire. So um, during that discussion, near the very end, um, Luca and I were kind of thinking a lot more about the complexities of the Jedi as we move into the Clone Wars during the beginning of the end of the Republic. And we were thinking about the the sort of problem, the complex problem the Jedi find themselves in during the Clone Wars. Something that you see a lot if you watch the show, and I hope a good amount of people, have actually seen Clone Wars because it was great. But it's one thing that they always mention every few episodes, something that they don't let the viewer forget is that the Jedi are meant to be peacekeepers. But that kind of raises the question, are peacekeepers soldiers? So, Luca, why don't you jump on that?
Yeah, so obviously Clone Wars, great show, brilliant, has its ups and downs. But as you said, the Jedi in general are portrayed as soldiers in the show, you know? Obviously the clones, they refer to them as, General Skywalker, General Kenobi. So if you look at peacekeepers, it seems kind of juxtaposing using a peacekeeper Jedis that are usually their philosophy is peacekeeping to implement them as soldiers in a war because obviously they're Jedi's, they're peacekeepers, they're supposed to be diplomatic and stoic, and when they get used in the military as generals and they use their lightsabers as weapons and they kill, obviously they're droids but they still kill. You got to ask, should peacekeepers be used as soldiers? Because once again, the Jedi, when they first signed up, they would their their whole war is against the Sith and the dark side of the Force, and the Republic uses them more as day-to-day soldiers, generals that they don't have the military knowledge really. They don't get taught and as a Padawan how to know use military strategies to overcome the opponent, but you can understand that they're being used because enemies fear Jedi's, their capabilities. And we've noticed they've not been, because if we look at our idea of peacekeeping, it's through diplomacy, optimism, negotiation. Often Jedi's don't negotiate as much as we see them on the battlefield slaughtering droids. And there's this one episode we were talking about Khalil, the first episode, was it the arc? What's the planet called?
Christophsis.
Christophsis, exactly, where we see Obi-Wan needs to buy time for the crew to get by an enemy line. So he waves a white flag, so to speak, and starts negotiating a retreat. And obviously it ends up being a trap. So Anakin and his Padawan Ahsoka have enough time to get by an enemy lines and beat the separatists once again. But you can see how they were negotiating, but it's a breach of, for example, the Geneva Convention, which we don't know exists in Star Wars, but we like to think that there's some kind of rules to war. And here the Jedi's have obviously breached that and decided for a more pessimistic approach, tricking their opponent using their actual goodwill to their advantage and crossing them in the end, which we would deem as a political scientist, as political scientists that we are, we deem that a very disrespectful act, breaching the rules of law. Because if it were the other way around, I don't think the Jedis would react that kindly. So overall, throughout the Clone Wars, we see the Jedi being used as soldiers more as keepers of peace. And reflecting back to the question, when Jedis are used as soldiers, they're not very much peacekeepers as they are just tools of war, really. So with that, back to you, Khalil.
Well, um, as a keeper of the peace, can you continue to be a keeper of the peace once war has already begun? Because you, as a keeper of the peace, you don't need to be a soldier in peacetime. You don't need to be. You could just be a negotiator in our case. You could be a UN negotiator or some sort of diplomat, some sort of person that is brought to an unstable region or situation in where the conflict must be resolved before open, like the disagreement needs to be resolved before open conflict is brought about. So, like before the war, you don't need to be a soldier, you could be a negotiator. Um, but once war has already begun, does your peacekeeping role change into a soldier role? The goal, I guess, then it would then change from not just preventing war from breaking out, because if a war breaks out as a peacekeeper, you've already failed your job, which might actually be the lesson of the Jedi, is that they failed to keep the peace. But once the war started, did they continue being peacekeepers, or were they only soldiers? Um, so, you know, I guess there is something to be said, though, that you can continue to be a peacekeeper as a soldier in war, as long as what you do brings about a victory, which is the end of the war, and therefore the faster approach of peace, which is why Luca, you come to the whole um, like the Jedi breaking the rules of war in Christophsis. And it isn't the only time in Clone Wars when this happens. This happens a lot. But that's why you come to that conclusion about the Jedi breaking the rules of war, because they break the rules of war out of an attempt to deceive their enemy. And they deceive their enemy because they're desperate about bringing about that victory. If two opposing forces are going to continue fighting each other forever, and you have a forever war, then peace is never going to come. But
Mm-hmm.
um, there is a such thing, I like to believe, and I think definitely to a certain extent the Jedi Council believes as well, as we see with the season 6 conversation amongst the Jedi Council when they found out that Dooku was the one that created the clones. They spoke with each other saying, well, we must quickly end this war so that we can resolve this clear invisible hand that they see as like guiding the events of the war. And so they saw it as very important that they end the war quickly. So they did not want a forever war. They wanted to bring peace as fast as possible. So I think there is an argument to be said that you can continue to be a peacekeeper as a soldier. It's just that the directive changes from keeping the peace to bringing about peace.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a very interesting viewpoint, and it brought me to think, because one thing the Clone Wars does, and Star Wars more recently has been doing, is showing how politicians have a role in it, contrary to the Jedi's, how both the Jedi and politicians often want peace, and use terms as enemy, and we need to ask if there was even peace to begin with, because we if you look at the Mandalore system, right? They're neutral in the war, and the only time we see conflict, happen is when external parties get involved, right? They're not part of the Republic or the separatist movement, but they're at peace. And if you look at politicians, for example, Amidala, she's a full-on believer in democracy, liberty, and all those values. And she often goes and she works on bipartisan bills, right? She has friends that belong to the separatist movement. And the Jedi, for example, they have that whole view of the separatists being bad, which inherently stops their philosophy of negotiation and diplomacy if they don't think the enemy is to be reasoned with. While politicians such as Amidala, they believe in negotiation between party lines. A party line is obviously a loose term because they're not parties, but they believe that you can negotiate with the separatists, and they're not evil people, and they're compromised of outer rim planets, right? They don't have the same representation. And every time there's conflict, there's reason. There are two sides to the argument. There are two reasons why there's conflict to begin with. And the critique here is that as soon as the Jedi got used as soldiers, war was inevitable. There's always going to be reactions on both sides, right?
Right.
So what started off as Phantom Menace, the separatist, the trade union, doing a blockade, the Republic didn't respond. Obviously, there was you had the Gungans helping out. You had the Naboo Air Force, and there's a lot of violence, a lot of military action there. And then come to Attack of the Clones, they fully developed their own army, which was really the downfall of any peace negotiations in a sense, because it's just going to lead to an arms race, basically. My point being is that if Jedis would have believed in negotiation and stuck to it, perhaps there would have been a more peaceful outcome. Because Palpatine, the puppet master, you got to think he wanted the Jedis to be used as warriors, right? Because a lot of separatist planets end up having this negative view. They don't trust them. What Obi-Wan did, obviously, breaking those the rules of war. That doesn't come unnoticed, and the Jedi start having a negative reputation being used as soldiers, and that comes on later. Ahsoka. It's part of the reason Ahsoka leaves. On Count Dooku, they kind of lost faith in the Jedi Order. And a lot of the public does as well after those bombings. Remember when Ahsoka gets put on trial? A lot of the public actually start losing faith in the Jedi because of that reason, because they don't think they're peacekeepers anymore as soon as they were used as soldiers. So I think I laid my argument there. Do you have anything you want to respond with?
I have a counter. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Satine refuses. Well, here's the thing. You talked about Mandalore, which is fascinating.
Yeah, there's just one point. I think my greater point there was, how the public loses faith and how the Jedi being implemented as soldiers inherently just forces war to be the only option. Because the senators such as Amidala, because Amidala is a perfect example of somebody who believes in diplomacy.
It's a strong point. It's a strong point. You say that that it was the intention of Palpatine in the first place to turn the Jedi into soldiers, and therefore destroy their purpose, turn the people against them, and end up getting support to destroy the Order itself, and why there wasn't much outcry after Order 66 because of it. So the intention was to bring about a war, confuse the narrative of peacekeeper and soldier, and therefore bring about his own rise in power. My thing is, just kind of, I'm doing a little bit of nitpicking here, and then I'm going to expand that nitpicking to potentially destroy your argument entirely. So basically,
We'll see about that.
We'll see about that, okay? Because I think I got something here. Is that you used Mandalore as an example. You said that that Mandalore was on the side of peace. It was on I think it was like the council with neutral nations, a council of neutral nations,
Hmm.
neutral planets. It was the leader of 1,500 separate systems that all supported being neutral in the conflict. Now, I think a lot of those nations were actually officially still part of the Republic. They just did not. Um, they just did not engage in war. They were not going to host Republic clones or separatist droids onto their planet to provoke either side from starting or continuing any
No,
conflict.
they weren't part of the Republic because if you remember, they came to, for example, Amidala went for aid for Mandalore, but Palpatine said rightfully so because they're not part of the Republic in any ways. They can't get any support, or they don't have basically any external sovereignty when it comes to Mandalore. They can't help because they're neutral. Basically, they wanted to be fully neutral and left by themselves, so they're
Okay.
not part of the Republic at all.
All right. That's all right. Okay, that actually adds up. But it doesn't change much if you hear what I'm saying, because you said that Mandalore, its intention was to keep the peace on its own planet. And it was only until other powers got involved that war was brought to the planet. Now, the reason why conflict came to Mandalore, and it took a while over multiple seasons, but the first piece of it was the inability of Satine to snuff out the Death Watch. The Death Watch
Hmm.
asked for separatist support to weaken Satine's rule and then rule over the country, rule over the planet. Um, but it was
Basically,
all
overthrow the government like a
yes,
coup d'état.
overthrow the government through a coup with separatist support, and then obviously with the separatist support, the Republic was going to bring troops. That was the whole point of the first Mandalore arc in season 2. So this all came about. If you look at the root cause of war being brought to Mandalore, it was because Satine was unable to snuff out the Death Watch. Now, to her credit, in the first episode or two of that first arc, I don't actually think Satine knew how strong the Death Watch actually was. They're like,
But why is the Death Watch so strong? It is because external interference from the separatists, from Count Dooku, right? That's
mhm,
only why the Death Watch. If they weren't there, then it wouldn't be that big of an issue. And it comes back to the whole point of external powers interfering with Mandalore, right?
right. But Satine, once she did know about it, she refused to bring Republic troops to the planet until, I don't know, season 5 or 6 or 7. So there
Uh, I
was
mean, but doesn't Obi? Wait. Isn't that until season 7, the finale, right? When Darth Maul takes over.
right, and Republic troops finally come to the planet. Yeah.
Yeah, because Obi-Wan had to go on a secret mission. He wasn't on order of. It was a very, personal decision to come save Satine.
Yeah, it was her. It was his
Right.
own personal choice. He did so without the support of the council, without the support of the Senate. But moving over to
Hmm.
season 7, because you actually helped me think of something right here, is that the Republic brought their troops over to the planet, and Kenobi was very much against this when Satine's sister Bo-Katan suggested it, saying that there was already a war being fought. It would break trade as 100 years old. I yeah, that it would just complicate the situation and lead to more unnecessary conflict, and compromise the Republic essentially. So Kenobi was against it, but Bo-Katan was very heavy-handed in it because of a fundamental difference in thinking between her and her sister. Her
Yeah.
sister was rather naive when it came to her understanding of how peace was supposed to be brought about. You can see this on very micro levels, like whenever her council of ministers and her cabinet were disagreeing on something, they were having a debate about something. She would cut off that debate and saying that there was a war in her room now. But on a wider
Hmm.
angle, like as of her leadership over the planet, um, she was very different than Bo-Katan in the sense that she did not think that the Republic is something that was needed to bring about peace on the planet. Now, Bo-Katan, she did have her own problems because it was actually bringing the Republic to the planet um, that very soon after brought the Empire to the planet, but she didn't know that. She brought the Republic to the planet to weaken Maul's forces and therefore finally snuff out the Death Watch, something that her sister had failed to do up until her death. And it was actually a Death Watch member, Maul at the time, that killed her because she was unable to snuff out that threat. And Bo-Katan had every intention to do so. She had no idea
Okay.
that the Republic was going to turn into the Empire as soon as that battle was won.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough. The Queen got killed because Darth Maul wanted revenge for Obi-Wan. And the whole side plot was very emotional, and obviously a lot of the decisions made by Obi-Wan weren't very Jedi-like because they obviously had a
But
romance in the
Maul,
past.
but Maul came to Mandalore with support of the Death Watch. Again,
Yeah,
3 seasons after Satine was aware of the threat of the Death Watch. And so she failed to snuff that threat out.
yeah. But I think Satine's view was that if she takes either side, there's bound to be conflict because it's politicized, right? There's this divide. If you look back to the Cold War era, when the Truman Doctrine was implemented, and they try to get countries to join either the US side, the liberal democracy side, or the USSR, the social side. And similarly, the Republic wanted countries to join them, and then separatists wanted not countries, planets to join them, right? Especially Mandalore is a very powerful country. So what she was doing was actually very smart. And she said, I don't want anything to do. She was kind of a Switzerland in this sense, only that the other countries, the two sides, separatists and the Republic, wanted them on their side because of their resources, their money, their technology. Obviously, it's a very strong country. That's why you see the former minister trying to trade Mandalore's resources on the black market, right? It's a very valuable planet. And I think Satine's point here is she knows she can keep peace as long as she doesn't take a side and she stays neutral, She doesn't shy away from both sides, right? But she wants to make it clear that she doesn't despise one side. She is not taking sides. And that worked for Mandalore for a long time. It was only until the sleaze, and obviously she, as a leader, she got a bit weaker, and the Death Watch grew stronger, and it's her fault for not reacting strong. But she did try to react against the Death Watch, right? She did accept help in hunting down the Death Watch from Ahsoka, for example, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, separatists, Count Dooku was funding because they had enough. They wanted to overthrow, they wanted to take power. The original plan was for Mandalore to then join the separatists under the Death Watch. Obviously, things happened, and Darth Maul is always an exponential that wasn't in the original formula. He's a whole new element of the history of Mandalore. But when we go back to the point about keeping peace, you need to agree that the original philosophy of keeping peace and serving your own people, just like Switzerland did, keeping their country safe. Look at them now. It is in itself the best way to keep peace, and that's staying neutral, even though it's kind of selfish to some degrees, not helping out people in need, and but it is best for their people, and they were thriving until external interference, which created a whole domino effect of bad things to come, and eventually the death of the Queen, which led to the whole spiral of events. And then you had, what was it called, the Night of 1,000 Tears?
Yeah.
Basically the downfall of Mandalore, and it's unrecognizable now. And that is because external interference. We can
Right.
argue it's a weird coincidence that as soon as a Sith and a Jedi meet there, the clones and the droids the droids weren't there, but the clones were there. that this happened. It wouldn't have happened if, the Queen was still alive and it was a neutral planet. And that's why it
Well,
was such a big enemy to the Empire as well. Sorry, so I'll let you speak now.
I'm trying to figure out here if Mandalore is a core planet. Um,
I don't think it's in the Outer Rim.
yeah, it's
It's
not
not
an
too far
upper
from
one.
Cars.
So, okay, well, Mandalore, it's it, I will concede that Satine's original plan um was it had good intentions, but what we have to look at is the impact. You know,
Yeah.
is the intention was good. Bring her own people and her allied group of 1,500 planets and systems um, to join her in this neutral effort. Hopefully, with the scale of these neutral nations to be able to kind of shrink the war in the galaxy to where neutral nations would still have the opportunity to trade with each other and to be able to bring about a certain amount of sustainability during the conflict. So it had good intentions, but
Mhm.
it failed, and we have to look at why it failed. If we want to make a good connection to the real world, to be able to really figure out what is best, to adopt the pessimistic or the optimistic angle of peacekeeping. And I actually think the more that we look at Mandalore and the more that we look at once war has already started, what is the best way to go? We're actually deviating a little bit from the original model of our peacekeeper soldiers. But
Mhm.
for the continuation of this idea, I think the reason why it failed is because again of she didn't take action to stop that interference. The interference was
Mhm.
always going to come to the Death Watch, um, because for whatever reason, the separatists saw it as strategically important to get the Death Watch in power, aid their coup to take over Satine's government. We have to think on the side of the separatists, they saw it as strategically important. And so the fight against making sure that that happened um, is then led over to Satine. Like it's now in
Mhm.
the ball is now in her corner to make sure that her nation doesn't fall under separatist control. Because whether she wanted
Yeah.
to or not, the separatists pushed her into a situation where she needed to combat that influence. And Obi-Wan was a very useful aid in making sure that 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 war did not break out because he was able to defeat a lot of separatist forces that were brought over there, kind of weaken the Death Watch. But Satine did not want to use her own resources apart from Obi-Wan, he is a Republic general himself,
Mhm.
to weaken that influence. The separatists were always going to come, but how did she respond to
Yeah.
it?
But that's my point, and that's why I used Mandalore as an example to the Jedi, because obviously the question still remained to Jedi philosophy, and I think part of the reason why I don't think they're keepers of peace is because they chose a side, and obviously they bet on the Republic winning the war, which in the end effect it doesn't really matter. But what I think the flaw of Mandalore was that it was too passive, too neutral. And that is, if they would have chosen to do business with both sides, then the separatists had no need to support the Death Watch. They would have been like, look, we already have enough allyship in a sense. So as a neutral country, you need to understand that the limits, like in general in life, if you're left or right, the middle is always the better. If you take the best of both worlds. So that's what she should have done. She should have worked with both sides to maintain peace. Because look how much peace she already established with being neutral. If only she managed to balance both sides, where she's like, look, we'll work with the Republic, because obviously she's more Republic leaning. If she were to choose, she would have chosen a Republic, obviously. But if she would have been like working with both sides, so both the Separatists and the Republic, I don't think Mandalore would be in trouble. The same way, if the Jedi wouldn't have been on the side of the Republic and serving the people more, because inherently the Republic is more of a representative democracy that is led by elitist people, right? We already got into that last session. And often we see how the Republic has failed the people in a sense. So if the Jedi would have become less political, because they have become political, and the same way their involvement in starting the clone army was very political, if they would have also served the Separatists or maybe worked with the Separatists, not as a force of bipartisanship between the Republic and the Separatists, that would have brought peace. And they wouldn't have to be used as soldiers. They would have been keepers of the peace by not being soldiers, right? And that brings me back to the question where I don't believe the Jedi should have been soldiers to keep the peace. Even if you're at war, they should have been neutral and served both parties. The same way Mandalore managed to avoid war for so long, conflict for so long. But inherently, they chose a side that was already rotten to its core and was just bound to lose. And they lost, they became too dependent, and that's how Palpatine was able to manipulate the public. And you can see this snowball effect where they should have, at the end of the day, stuck to serving the people. And that means also outer rim people, separatists. That might seem bad. The Jedis are stoics and they need to avoid that. They need to look at the best of both worlds, the best of both sides, and should have worked bipartisanshiply, both for the Separatists and the Republic. The same way Mandalore should have done that and would have avoided conflict. So that is my final conclusion.
Right. Okay. What I'm seeing is that Satine, Satine, as far as her peacekeeping role during peace, before foreign interference.
She should have appeased both sides.
We're looking at the difference here between peacekeeping in war and peacekeeping in peace. And of course, like even saying that out loud means recognizing that peacekeeping in war is just about bringing about peace the fastest way possible. But peacekeeping in war, that's something that Satine failed at wholeheartedly, completely, because peacekeeping in war means engaging in conflict and bringing about victory. And that's something that Satine never had the heart to do. But as far as
no, what I'm sorry, but what I mean is
peacekeeping and peace is that her intentions to work with both sides was a good enough of a theoretically winning plan to keep the peace before war comes around to her, at the very least.
Yeah, but she should have done that during wartime and as work with both sides, because obviously her being neutral is going to stir more conflict. Because in a way, what's more annoying than someone who ignores you, basically, if you're both sides, who's like, no, pushes you away. She should have appeased both sides to an extent where they wouldn't have wanted to, infiltrate Mandalore like the Separatists did. That's what I mean. During war, it's better to appease both sides, because if you bet on both sides, you can't lose, right? It's arbitrary betting to an extent. Can't lose.
So did Satine ever actually did she ever actually maintain any sort of connection with separatist leaders nearly as much as she did Republic leaders?
No, and that's her flaw. That's her fault, her downfall.
Right. So that is a major flaw of hers, not just her ability to act once foreign interference was brought to her planet, but even before it was her inability to communicate with separatist leaders as much as she did in Republic leaders. Um,
Hmm.
I'd say moving on to another example of keepers of the peace. What do we feel about Cham Syndulla and the Ryloth arc?
The one with
Oh,
Mace
oh,
Windu.
okay. Oh, hold up. I noticed that we're on low on time. Let's we can move on to that to another episode. But
Hmm.
you said that it'd be best for us to start concluding when we still have time left. So
Yeah. No, I want to hear because I've been doing a lot of speaking, and I think you probably have a lot to say, and I want to hear that.
yeah, yeah. In these last couple minutes, I'd really just conclude what we've been saying so far. We'll continue, but want to conclude what we've been saying so far, and just saying that peacekeeping, that you can still be a peacekeeper during wartime, but Satine failed in doing so. I don't know if she knew what the correct way of going about it in her situation was. But as you say, Luca, she would have definitely benefited from keeping communication with both sides. Her continued communication and attendance in Senate procedures for the Republic made the separatists think on their side that she was secretly pro Republic, and she was, but she just didn't want war. And so she still had the influence of the Republic without troops on the ground, still attended Republic procedures, still had hearty relations with people in the Republic, and to a certain extent kind of ignored the separatists. And so that was a failure on her part to keep up communication on both sides. I think keepers of the peace, they can be soldiers, but they aren't necessarily exclusively soldiers, because there are keepers of the peace like UN negotiators, which are just negotiators. They may come with an armed guard of peacekeepers along with them, but a peacekeeper isn't exclusively a soldier, and it isn't exclusively a negotiator. The Jedi are a good example of a peacekeeping power, but again, they also failed, and that's why the Republic fell. But I don't have too much time to expand on that, so we'll come back to another episode right after this. I'm Khalil,
I'm Luca.
and we are the Marshals of Truth. We will see you next time.
See ya.